welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we are going to talk about the history of Thomas Nelson Community College, but in a little bit of a different way through a book that's been written. Dr. Richard Hodges is the author. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is such a cool book because it tells the story through photos. And I think that takes people through the journey in a really visual way.
Yeah, and we were very proud to be able to produce such a book. If I could step back just for a few months, maybe even a year, I had been talking with our Vice President of Institutional Advancement about a book to commemorate our 50th anniversary. And so we were trying to come up with a format for the book. What would it look like? What would it be? And I saw a book like this that had been produced by Virginia Tech. And I noticed on the bottom it says Campus History Series. And so I contacted the publisher, Arcadia Publishing in South Carolina, and they do books like this. There's a bunch of them for Newport News, for Hampton, for the whole area. And so I said, you know, would you be interested in our history? And they said, well, we've never done a community college in Virginia, so sure, yeah. So I followed through with all of the paperwork, and about 2 months later, we got the contract. And then we began to put the book together. Thomas Nelson is very fortunate in that it has its own archive. It's one of only 3 community colleges in the state that has an archive. There's us, Virginia Western, and Northern Virginia. And within our archive, we actually have about 20,000 photographs. And
wow.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You had to sort through all those, didn't you?
Well, we haven't made it through all of them yet. But cataloging and sorting and such like that, it does take time. But we have a very dedicated staff. They are very excited about the archives. And we recently received a large amount of videotape from our audiovisual area, and I guess they were cleaning out their closets or something. And we got, well, basically 50 years worth of video. And so we will soon begin to go through that and just see what's there. In the book, there is a photograph, excuse me, of Governor Godwin he's doing a presentation at Thomas Nelson. I believe it's for the dedication of Wythe Hall. And it's being filmed, as you noticed, by, it says on the side of the camera, TNCC TV.
Right. Much like Hampton City Channel TV, yeah.
Yeah, just like it. But I had wondered, well, where are these tapes? And so now that we have this huge amount of tape, which is in various formats, I suspect it's in there somewhere. And so we're looking forward to finding that.
So looking back to those early days, and we've spent some time talking with Dr. Dever and talking about the history of the college and 50 years, there was this, you know, community colleges came about really quickly. I mean, the legislation was signed and you guys were open in like a year, year and a half maybe. It was something that came down from the governor, from the legislature as a way, and it's hard to realize this now 50 years later, that college should be accessible to everyone. Because back then, only the brightest and maybe the most affluent could go to college. It was not accessible. This was revolutionary.
That's true. Community colleges began at the turn of the century out in the Midwest, and they grew fairly rapidly nationally. But Virginia actually was a little bit late coming to the game.
And played hurry up.
Yeah, and in some ways that was good because it gave them a chance to look and see, well, what have these other states done, and what kind of model could we model after. One big thing that happened in Virginia that actually, you just said a moment ago, it looked like it just kind of suddenly occurred. Well, one thing that took place in Virginia in the mid-1950s with the passing of the Brown versus Board of Education ruling was a set of laws called massive resistance.
Yes.
And massive resistance was pretty harsh, and it made it to where if a school or a school system tried to desegregate, the governor had the power to actually close that school or entire school system.
And many counties and cities closed their
Yes,
school
they did.
systems. So
Yeah,
it
including
was a
Norfolk.
very, very ugly chapter in our
Yes,
history.
it was. And the sort of unintended consequence of that was it did tremendous damage to the business and industry community. Well, as a result of this, a group of people got together, a group of businessmen throughout the state, and organized themselves into a group called the Virginia Industrialization Group. And their sole intent was to reverse this legislation and to try then, of course, restore the business and industry. And so they met with Governor Almond. They were able over time to make this happen. But then after you reverse the legislation, you look at the damage.
Oh, school systems in some places were closed for almost 2 years, right?
Prince Edward County, I believe, 5 years. And
of course, the rich white children had private schools that
That's
sprung
right.
up to educate
That's right.
them, but
Yes.
African Americans didn't, and less wealthy white
yes,
families also suffered.
and one of the massive resistance
rural.
laws allowed the more affluent students to actually use state taxpayer money to pay for the private schools, which was unheard of prior to 1956. But members of the Virginia Industrialization Group would travel the state and, to various communities and say, wouldn't it be great to have an industry here? And people would get excited and they said, but we're not going to be able to make this happen without a statewide system of technical education. And so when Governor Harrison came in '62, working with these businessmen, and Harrison was a big industrialist, they decided we need to create this statewide technical college system. And so they hired Dana Hamill, who was then the director of the Roanoke Technical Institute, which was part of VPI, better known
Right,
as,
it was VPI back then.
better known as Virginia Tech
now.
today. And that was in '64, and within a year, they opened 2 of the technical colleges. The first one, of course, they just took Roanoke Technical Institute and converted it to Virginia Western Technical College. And about a week later, they opened Northern Virginia Technical College in Bailey's Crossroads, which is a little area sort of swallowed up by everything else up there now. But, and then it just sort of went on a roll. But you're right, Thomas Nelson opened very quickly after the 1966 legislation that said, hey, the technical colleges are becoming community colleges.
So the technical college was the root of this movement.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it was for industry, for trade professionals, for things like that. When did the academic first 2 years of college, that kind of came at the same time, though,
It did.
right?
It did. In fact, if you read an early newspaper interview with Dr. Hamill, who incidentally, he's still alive.
Oh,
He
wow.
lives in Richmond. He's just turned 95. But he was interviewed prior to, starting his work. And he said, eventually these will be comprehensive community colleges offering both transfer and technical education. So that was part of the DNA from the very beginning. You're right, it was there early on.
But the early thinking, I think, was more of the technical or more of the I'm already in the workforce, but I'm going back.
Yes.
Going back so that I can progress, so that I can get the college degree I didn't get the first time around. And now what I see is, well, I see the technical and the academic merging more. There's, you know, you don't work on an assembly line anymore. You work on the robot that works the assembly line. There's much more technological and IT functions in, you know, car repair, for example, is completely different than it used to be, because cars are driven by computers, and you have to know that part as well as the mechanics.
Well,
so there's been this merging of higher or more complicated learning to do things.
Oh, sure. And I think that's, you've kind of hit the nail on the head with how these industries have changed. For example, building cars now, you know, it's not dirty work anymore. And even repairing a car is not so dirty. It's not for, you know, the student who can't excel. It's for a student actually who has chosen that field. And unfortunately, there are still stereotypes that people have to sort of get past on that. But I think society is becoming more aware that you don't necessarily have to have a 4-year degree in order to have a really good, not just a good job, but a very satisfying career for your life. And over at Thomas Nelson, you know, we offer programs such as cybersecurity, which that's not necessarily a 4-year degree, but it's a very valuable field today and a very sought after field. And so if you have that training, that's certainly an area where people will be looking to you or looking for you as an employee.
I think that's true of a lot of the IT fields. And there's multiple entry points in a career now too. It's not like if I were going to do car repair, I would stay here for the rest of my life. You can move up, you can learn new things, you can learn the specialties of a particular automaker. There's a lot of variety in that. But the other trend I see in the community college is just the crazy cost increases in the cost of a 4-year education. And what it takes for someone to go to a 4-year institution, live on campus for 4 years, and graduate, they're coming out with so much debt that it takes forever to get a hold of that.
Yes, the amount of debt doesn't necessarily equal the amount of income they're going to make.
Sure, you try to do that and then have a career like, you know, a city planner or a teacher, and you're going to take a long time, and you can't always, I mean, there's not enough that you can do to make up for that. Yeah. Much less if you get a master's or a PhD, you know, PhD in teaching, that costs a lot in terms of making that back up. You know, so it's really hard for families these days to try to think about paying for that. And the community college system is becoming a way that a lot of people do. Oh
yeah, and another plus for the community college is as much as students, you know, obviously, you see students on TV at football games, and they're just, you know, loving it, and they're loving that college experience. A lot of them want the college experience, but they also would like to stay near home, or at least in their community that they or surroundings that they're used to, and so the community college offers that. For myself, my first 2 years of college was at a junior college in Mississippi. Later, of course, they're converted to community colleges. But it's very, I think there's a lot of advantages to staying near home, excuse me, staying near home, and not just cost savings, but also for some students that shift of going from high school into college, they make that a lot easier if they can do it near their or within their familiar surroundings.
And their resources and, things that they already know.
Yes.
But the other thing is that Thomas Nelson has become, of course, since that early years in the one building, it's a campus. I mean, it is a decent-sized campus, and there's a student body government, and there's some athletic teams, and it has much more of the college environment, I think, than it used to.
Oh, yes, yes. And if you look at, in fact, in the book, there's a photograph of what would have been what was called the concept plan. So it was the original prototype plan of what these colleges could look like, and it was drawn up by a firm in Richmond. But what it was meant to do was each college was meant to take this plan and then adapt it locally. So if you look at it, you see a lot of buildings sort of crammed into a small space, but you'll see athletic fields and things like that. So some of the colleges, it was thought of, well, that may be what your local area really would like to see. But you're right, Thomas Nelson satisfies that campus feel with multiple buildings. It started out with 3, now we have 10, and we have 2 campuses instead of just 1. And in the master plans for the future, for example, the Williamsburg campus, that's going to go from 1 building to 6.
Wow.
Over the next 30, 40 years. That's in the plan. And this campus here, while it still has its original buildings, we're moving quickly, actually, toward replacing those buildings with a new 3-story building that will be quite eye-catching from the highway.
Okay, so now I'm going to say, what changes come next? Where does the community college system, where does Thomas Nelson specifically go to adapt to the future?
I think that Thomas Nelson already makes a lot of adaptations toward the future. Cybersecurity is a good example of that.
And it's a particular one. I mean, obviously it's a field everywhere, but here with the amount of military presence we have, it is a particularly growing. And you do have programs that speak to the local job market.
Oh, yes, yes. And we do a lot of partnerships. For instance, we do a lot of work with the shipyard. And I know a few years ago we were offering, and this was through a grant program, we offered an electrician's certificate that was specific to someone on a ship. And while it only enrolled 10 people per cohort, I think out of the 2 years that it operated, because it was a grant program, only 1 person didn't get a job.
Wow.
And that was out of about 4 cohorts. So that's not bad. Excuse me. We also have a dental hygiene program up at our Williamsburg campus, which it's a small group, about 24 people, but we have quite a lengthy waiting list of people who want to get in it. And each year, the graduation rate is wonderful. They're all nationally certified, and I think out of that group, I would say it has about a 98% job. They find jobs.
So then in the future, continuing to have those programs that dovetail with the job needs and who can get hired, but also what people are interested in. And,
Yes.
I think that's one thing that's changed a little bit about going to college is sometimes people would say, well, I'm going to get a liberal arts degree and figure things out later. I don't know that people have that luxury anymore. Or I'm going to go learn this because it's my passion, but boy, the fashion merchandising world is already oversaturated, and it's a very hard field to break into. You know, it's like kids who think they're going to grow up and be a professional football player. Not very many of them make it. So how do you give them the well-roundedness that leads to a job, leads to education, leads to whatever, makes sense?
Well, I think what we do is we encourage them to pursue a degree where it's appropriate. Obviously, if they're in a workforce program, they can go on to a degree program. But if they're in the transfer programs for us, we always encourage them to follow through with the and graduate from Thomas Nelson, not just take a few classes and move on.
Right.
And then we constantly communicate with students. We always want to know what the students are interested in. What do they need? What do they see that would be beneficial for them at the college? The president, Dr. Dever, he's very good about holding forums, 2 forums a semester, 1 at each campus, open forum for students, and he'll field questions, and sometimes you hear these questions and you think, wow, that's a pretty great question. But he is very responsive to the students, and he wants to hear what they have to say. And that's one way that we try to improve the experience for the students.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We have to wrap up. There's a million more questions I'd like to answer, but what I'm going to say is people have to go get the book, right? Where can they get this?
They can get that book at Barnes & Noble. They can do it online, Amazon. They can actually go to Arcadia Publishing, their website, and get it. I've done 2 book signings already in the area. I'll be at the William and Mary bookstore, which is a Barnes & Noble in Williamsburg, November 9th, book signing there. And I believe it's October 27th in Newport News, Barnes & Noble. I'll be doing a book signing there.
And I think that, looking through this, and I've only had a little bit to glance, but you see the sort of changing face of the students. You see the origins of the nickname Tommy Tech, which some people thought was derogatory, but wasn't, at least initially. And you see how the college and the people that it serves, which is our community, has changed and grown. So it's a fabulous look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. I hope you will take a look at this book and take a moment, too, to think about what we would be like if we didn't have Thomas Nelson, if we did not have that resource in our community, and appreciate how many people it has served, whether you take one class or a degree program or certificate program, or the workforce where it works specifically with a business to train or retrain workers to the next level. So think about the resource that we have and how it's going to continue over the next 50 years to grow and serve us. Thanks for watching.